When Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone arrived in cinemas in 2001, few people could have predicted just how enormous the phenomenon would become. The film introduced audiences to Hogwarts, Quidditch, Diagon Alley, moving staircases, enchanted objects, terrifying creatures, and a young wizard who had no idea how important he was about to become. But behind the magic was something just as remarkable. A group of actors whose lives were about to change forever. Some were already respected veterans of British cinema and theater. Others were children who had barely begun their careers. Together, they created a cast that would become inseparable from one of the most recognizable film franchises in history. The original movie featured Daniel Radcliffe as Harry Potter, Rupert Grint as Ron Weasley, Emma Watson as Hermione Granger, Richard Harris as Dumbledore, Maggie Smith as Professor McGonagall, Alan Rickman as Severus Snape, Robbie Coltrane as Hagrid, Julie Walters as Molly Weasley, Richard Griffiths as Vernon Dursley, Fiona Shaw as Petunia Dursley, Tom Felton as Draco Malfoy, Harry Melling as Dudley Dursley, Matthew Lewis as Neville Longbottom, and many other performers. More than 2 decades later, looking back at that first film feels almost like opening an old photograph album. The children who once walked through the doors of Hogwarts are now adults with careers, families, creative projects, and lives far removed from the sets that defined their childhoods. Meanwhile, several beloved veteran performers have sadly passed away, leaving behind performances that continue to introduce new generations to their work. This is the story of what happened to some of the most memorable faces from Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, where they began, how they changed, and what their journeys looked like by 2025. Daniel Radcliffe entered the Harry Potter universe at just 11 years old, but the boy audiences saw on screen was already capable of carrying an extraordinary responsibility. Playing Harry Potter meant becoming the face of a worldwide franchise before he was old enough to understand what that level of fame would ultimately mean. When the first film premiered in 2001, Radcliffe had the difficult task of portraying a character who was simultaneously vulnerable, curious, frightened, funny, and courageous. He had to make Harry believable as an ordinary child, while also convincing audiences that this apparently ordinary boy belonged in an extraordinary world. He succeeded, and the role transformed him into one of the most recognizable young actors on the planet. What makes Radcliffe's story especially interesting is what he did after Harry Potter ended. Instead of simply repeating the same kind of role, he deliberately looked for projects that would challenge the image audiences had developed of him. He appeared in the horror film The Woman in Black, explored unusual comedy and drama in Swiss Army Man, and continued working on stage. His theater career became particularly important because live performance gave him a completely different challenge from playing a character inside a massive movie franchise. He appeared on Broadway in How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, and later starred in the acclaimed revival of Merrily We Roll Along. That production earned him a Tony Award, an achievement that demonstrated just how far he had traveled from the 11-year-old boy audiences first met at Hogwarts. Radcliffe has also spoken openly about the complicated experience of growing up under such intense public attention. Rather than allowing Harry Potter to become the only definition of his career, he continued experimenting with different forms of storytelling. By 2025, the contrast between the tiny boy wearing round glasses and the mature actor appearing on stage and screen was almost impossible to miss. Yet Radcliffe has never appeared embarrassed by his connection to Harry Potter. Instead, he has repeatedly recognized the enormous role the franchise played in his life. The world may always call him Harry, but his career after Hogwarts proved that Daniel Radcliffe was capable of becoming much more than one character. Emma Watson's transformation is equally remarkable. When she first appeared as Hermione Granger, she was only 11 years old. Hermione was intelligent, determined, outspoken, prepared, and occasionally frustrating because she cared so deeply about rules and academic achievement. Watson captured those qualities, while also giving Hermione emotional warmth. As the series progressed, Hermione became much more than the clever friend who knew the answers. She became a courageous young woman who repeatedly placed herself in danger for the people she loved. Watson grew alongside that character, and audiences watched both actress and character mature over the course of the 8 films. The official Wizarding World has described Radcliffe, Watson, and Grint as spending roughly 9 years of their lives making the 8 movies, from childhood into young adulthood. After Harry Potter, Watson made an especially deliberate effort to work outside the fantasy world that had made her famous. She appeared in The Perks of Being a Wallflower, The Bling Ring, Noah, and the live-action Beauty and the Beast. Her performance as Belle introduced her to another enormous international audience and demonstrated that she could lead a major studio production without relying on Hermione as a reference point. She also became increasingly involved in activism and advocacy, particularly around gender equality. Her work with UN Women and the He for She campaign gave her a public identity beyond acting. By 2025, Watson's relationship with Hollywood looked very different from what many might have expected when she was a child star. Rather than appearing in one blockbuster after another, she became more selective and explored education, fashion, activism, and creative projects. Her transformation is therefore not simply physical. It is a transformation in priorities. The little girl who once stood in Hogwarts holding books and explaining complicated magical rules grew into a woman who increasingly wanted control over how her own life and career were defined. Rupert Grint had perhaps the most instantly recognizable personality of the 3 young stars. As Ron Weasley, he played Harry's best friend and a member of the trio who often brought humor into tense situations. Ron was insecure at times, jealous at others, and terrified in ways that felt completely human. Yet he was also fiercely loyal. Grint understood that Ron did not need to be perfect. He needed to feel real. That quality helped make the character so beloved. Grint was only a child when he entered the franchise, and like Radcliffe and Watson, he spent much of his formative years on Harry Potter sets. The series eventually ended in 2011, but Grint's acting career did not disappear with Ron. Instead, he moved toward television and smaller productions where he could explore characters that had little connection to Hogwarts. He appeared in the television series Snatch and Sick Note, and later starred in the psychological horror series Servant. He also returned to film and projects including Knock at the Cabin. One of the most fascinating parts of Grint's post-Potter journey is how comfortable he has seemed with taking a quieter path. He never appeared obsessed with proving that he was no longer Ron Weasley. Instead, he embraced the fact that the character would always be part of his identity while continuing to build another life around it. By 2025, Grint was not the awkward red-haired child audiences remembered. He was a grown man, father, actor, and producer whose career had developed in a surprisingly different direction from many traditional Hollywood stars. Then there was Tom Felton, whose Draco Malfoy became one of the franchise's most memorable antagonists. Felton was only a teenager when he first appeared as Draco, but his performance immediately established the character's arrogance. Draco was spoiled, privileged, sarcastic, and determined to remind everyone that his family considered itself superior. Yet as the series progressed, Felton helped reveal something more complicated beneath the sneering exterior. Draco was not simply a villain. He was a frightened teenager trapped inside a family ideology that he did not fully control. Felton's performance became increasingly subtle as the films moved toward their darker conclusion. He had to show fear, pressure, hesitation, and moral conflict without turning Draco into a completely different person. Felton had already begun acting before Harry Potter. He appeared in The Borrowers and Anna and the King, but Harry Potter changed the scale of his public recognition. After the franchise ended, he worked to establish himself beyond Draco through films, television, and music. He appeared in projects such as Rise of the Planet of the Apes and the television series The Flash, while also taking on stage and independent work. Perhaps more than almost anyone from the franchise, Felton has maintained a strong relationship with Harry Potter fans. His later memoir, Beyond the Wand, also gave audiences an opportunity to hear about his experiences in his own voice. The young boy who once stood opposite Harry with a contemptuous expression eventually became one of the cast members most willing to look back affectionately on the experience. By 2025, it was clear that Tom Felton had successfully transformed Draco Malfoy from a childhood role into the foundation of a much broader career. Bonnie Wright had a different journey. As Ginny Weasley, she initially had only a small presence in the first movie. Ginny was the youngest Weasley child and Harry's future love interest, but the character's importance grew considerably as the story developed. Wright therefore had the unusual experience of starting the franchise almost in the background and gradually becoming part of its emotional center. Wright continued playing Ginny throughout the series, and audiences watched her grow from a shy child into a confident young witch. But after Harry Potter ended, Wright did not simply continue chasing acting roles. She became increasingly interested in filmmaking and directing. Her creative work behind the camera demonstrated that her ambitions extended beyond being recognized as Ginny Weasley. Her post-Potter identity has included directing, producing, writing, and environmental interests. She also became an author and a mother, building a life that looks remarkably different from the image of the young actress standing inside the burrow. By 2025, Bonnie Wright represented one of the most interesting examples of a Harry Potter child actor using early fame as a starting point for a broader creative life. The story of Matthew Lewis is even more dramatic visually. When he first appeared as Neville Longbottom, audiences were not supposed to think of him as a heroic leading man. Neville was shy, clumsy, nervous, and frequently underestimated. Lewis leaned into those qualities so completely that many viewers eventually came to believe the actor himself was as awkward as the character. But Lewis grew up. As the films progressed, Neville underwent one of the most satisfying character transformations in the entire series. The nervous boy who struggled to stand up for himself eventually became a courageous figure who fought against Voldemort and became essential to the final battle. Lewis's own physical transformation became a major topic among fans after the series ended, but the more important change was professional. He demonstrated that he could play characters completely unrelated to Neville. Lewis appeared in films and television productions including The Rise, Me Before You, and the BBC drama Ripper Street. He also worked in theater and continued developing his career away from the fantasy franchise. By 2025, anyone who only remembered him as the round-faced boy from the first Harry Potter film might have been genuinely surprised by the adult actor he became. Harry Melling's story is another extraordinary example of transformation. Melling played Dudley Dursley, Harry's spoiled cousin. Dudley was deliberately written as an unpleasant child, and Melling played him with a combination of arrogance, entitlement, and comic excess. Yet the actor's life after Harry Potter went in a direction few viewers could have predicted. Melling experienced a dramatic physical change as he grew older, losing significant weight. Because audiences associated him so strongly with Dudley, the transformation made it easier for him to escape the image of the spoiled cousin. Instead of remaining trapped by childhood fame, he pursued serious theater and film work. His later career included critically respected appearances in productions such as The Queen's Gambit, The Devil All the Time, The Old Guard, and The Tragedy of Macbeth. These performances introduced him to audiences who might never have realized that the actor playing a sophisticated dramatic role had once been Dudley Dursley. That may be one of the greatest surprises of the entire Harry Potter cast. Melling did not merely grow older. He reinvented his professional identity. The child actor who had once been known for shouting at Harry became an adult performer capable of subtle, demanding dramatic work. His journey proves that being associated with one famous role does not necessarily determine the rest of an actor's career. Then there's James Phelps and his twin brother Oliver Phelps, who played Fred and George Weasley. The twins brought an entirely different energy to the series. Whenever Hogwarts became too serious, Fred and George were usually nearby with a joke, a prank, or some ridiculous invention. James and Oliver were born on the same day in 1986 and became inseparable from the Weasley twins in the eyes of audiences. Their physical resemblance helped make the casting especially convincing, but their performances also gave Fred and George distinct personalities. Although the twins were mischievous, their loyalty to their family was never in doubt. The emotional importance of Fred's fate in the final film made their journey especially powerful. What had begun as comic relief became part of the story's most painful moments. James Phelps had to move from light-hearted comedy to genuine grief, and that contrast demonstrated how much both the actors and their characters had matured. After Harry Potter, James and Oliver continued acting, but they also developed a strong connection with fans through podcasts and other media projects. Their ability to discuss the franchise from the perspective of people who actually lived through its production gave audiences a different way of understanding the experience. By 2025, the Phelps twins were no longer the teenage pranksters running through Hogwarts corridors. They were mature performers and media personalities who had turned their unusual shared history into an ongoing connection with the Harry Potter community. Julie Walters brought something entirely different to the franchise. She was already an established and celebrated actress before she became Molly Weasley. Unlike the young cast members, Walters did not need Harry Potter to establish her reputation. She had already built an extraordinary career in theater, film, and television. As Molly Weasley, she became the emotional heart of the Weasley family. Her performance was funny, warm, protective, and fierce. Molly could be affectionate one moment and absolutely terrifying the next. Walters understood that motherhood in the Harry Potter universe was not passive. Molly was willing to confront anyone who threatened her family. Her earlier career included the celebrated film Educating Rita, a role that brought her international recognition and an Academy Award nomination. She had also worked extensively in British television and theater. Harry Potter introduced her to a new generation, many of whom may have first discovered Julie Walters as Mrs. Weasley before exploring the rest of her career. Walters continued acting after the Harry Potter series, appearing in films such as Paddington and Paddington 2, and taking on numerous television and film roles. Her career demonstrated how an experienced performer could become part of a global franchise without being defined exclusively by it. Maggie Smith's Professor McGonagall remains one of the most beloved performances in the series. Smith was already a legendary actress when she entered Hogwarts. She had won